The mortar round hit 30 meters from the eastern perimeter, close enough that Lieutenant Ryan Garrett felt the shockwave through his boots. Dust and debris rained down on the makeshift command post as he pressed himself against the sandbag wall, radio crackling with desperate transmissions. Contact, south wall, multiple hostiles breaching the wire, ammunition critical on the north position. Medic, we need a medic at checkpoint 3. Ryan wiped the grit from his eyes and keyed his handset. All positions, maintain fire discipline. Conserve ammo. Air support is inbound, ETA 20 minutes. The lie tasted like copper in his mouth. The nearest gunships were over an hour away, grounded by the sandstorm that had swept across the valley an hour before sunset. Forward operating base Sentinel had been a quiet posting until 3 days ago. 72 Marines, a handful of Navy corpsmen, and enough supplies for a month of routine patrols. Now they were surrounded, outnumbered 5 to 1, and watching their defensive perimeter collapse one position at a time. Sergeant Hayes stumbled into the command post, blood streaming from a gash above his eyebrow. Lieutenant, we've got maybe 200 rounds left across all positions. The ammunition bunker took a direct hit in the first wave. Ryan's mind raced through tactical options, each one bleaker than the last. They could fall back to the central building, but that meant abandoning wounded men still scattered across the compound. They could attempt a breakout, but in the dark, through hostile territory, with injured personnel, it would be a massacre. Tell the squad leaders to pool ammunition from the wounded. Anyone who can't fight gives up their magazines. Ryan hated the order even as he gave it. This was how units died, rationing bullets like water in a desert. The compound shook again, this time closer. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoed from multiple directions, punctuated by the deeper boom of rocket-propelled grenades. Through the haze of smoke and dust, Ryan could see muzzle flashes creeping closer to the wire. Corporal Bennett, barely 20 years old with a face that still looked like it belonged in a high school yearbook, gripped his M4 with white knuckles. "Sir, are we going to make it?" Ryan met the younger man's eyes. The honest answer was no. The answer a leader gives was different. "We hold until dawn. Marines don't quit ground." He checked his own magazine. 15 rounds. He had 2 more magazines in his vest. 45 bullets between him and whatever came next. The radio squawked again. This time it was Corporal Davis from the western bunker. Movement on the supply road. Civilian vehicle approaching the gate. Civilian? Ryan's blood ran cold. Out here, 3 kilometers from the nearest village. In the middle of a firefight? Do not engage. Confirm it's not a VBIED. A vehicle-borne improvised explosive device could punch through their gate and end this siege in one catastrophic blast. Negative on VBIED profile, sir. It's an old pickup truck. Single occupant. Drivers exiting the vehicle now. Ryan grabbed his rifle and moved toward the west wall, keeping low. What he saw through the pre-dawn darkness made no sense. A figure in civilian clothes, moving with purpose toward the gate, seemingly oblivious to the bullets cutting through the air overhead. "Cover them," Ryan shouted. 2 Marines pivoted their rifles to provide suppressing fire as the figure reached the gate. Hayes yanked it open just wide enough for the person to slip through, then slammed it shut again. That's when Ryan saw her clearly for the first time. She was maybe 30 years old, lean and wiry, with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She wore a canvas jacket that had seen better decades, torn at the shoulder and stained with old blood. But it was what she carried that made every Marine in the vicinity stop and stare. A rifle. Not a modern assault weapon, not even a hunting rifle from this century. It was a bolt-action piece that looked like it belonged in a museum. The wooden stock was scratched and worn, the metal barrel showed patches of rust, and the leather sling was cracked with age. "Ma'am, you need to get to the bunker immediately," Ryan said, moving toward her. "This is an active combat zone." She looked at him with eyes that were startlingly calm, given the chaos erupting around them. "I know exactly where I am, Lieutenant." Another mortar round exploded, this one impacting near the medical tent. The woman didn't flinch. She scanned the compound with the practiced efficiency of someone reading terrain, not running from it. Hayes stepped forward, hand on his sidearm. "Lieutenant, we need to secure her. Could be a scout, a saboteur." "I'm neither," she said, her voice cutting through Hayes' suspicion. "And you're about to be overrun in approximately 8 minutes if you don't adjust your defensive positions." Ryan felt anger flare in his chest. They were dying, and this civilian was giving tactical advice? "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but my name is Elena Reeves. she interrupted, meeting his glare without backing down. And this rifle belonged to my grandfather, Staff Sergeant Thomas Reeves, 1st Marine Division, Okinawa, 1945. He was a scout sniper. Confirmed kills, 97. She hefted the old weapon. With this exact rifle, the name meant nothing to Ryan, but something in her bearing made him pause. She held the rifle like it was an extension of her body, with the casual competence of someone who'd logged thousands of hours behind a weapon. Bennett's voice cracked over the radio. Enemy movement on the South Ridge. They're setting up heavy weapons. Elena moved before Ryan could respond, striding toward the southern sandbag wall with the confidence of someone who owned the ground beneath her feet. She dropped prone behind cover, worked the rifle's bolt with smooth precision, and brought the weapon to her shoulder. "What are you doing?" Ryan demanded, scrambling after her. "Buying you time." She peered through the rifle's iron sights, made a minute adjustment, and exhaled slowly. "Tell your men to get ready to shift positions when I fire." "You can't possibly." The rifle barked once. The sound was different from modern weapons, sharper, more elemental. Through the scope of his own rifle, Ryan saw a figure on the distant ridge stagger and fall. Not just any figure, the one crouched behind what looked like a mortar tube. Silence rippled across the compound. Marines who'd been firing in desperate bursts paused, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The ridge was over 600 meters away. In poor light, with wind gusting across the valley, Elena worked the bolt, ejecting the spent brass. 620 meters, accounting for 7-knot crosswind and temperature drop. "Your men can move now, Lieutenant. They'll try to flank from the northwest gully in response." Ryan stared at her, then at the old rifle, then back at her face. "Who the hell are you?" She met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw something beyond the tactical focus, a depth of pain that matched the violence surrounding them. Someone who knows how this ends, and someone who has business with the people trying to kill you. 20 years earlier, a 12-year-old Elena had stood in her grandfather's workshop, the same rifle cradled awkwardly in her two small arms. The wood still smelled of gun oil and old battlefields, though Thomas Reeves had spent the better part of 40 years trying to wash the war from its grain. "Easy now, Ellie," the old man had said, his weathered hands guiding hers to the proper grip. "This rifle's got history. Respect it, and it'll respect you back." Thomas Reeves looked like any other grandfather in small-town Montana flannel shirts. Coffee-stained smile, hands more comfortable with fishing rods than weapons. But Elena had seen the photographs tucked in his desk drawer. A young Marine in the Pacific, face hard with the knowledge of terrible things. This exact rifle slung across his shoulders. "Why did you keep it, Grandpa?" she'd asked that day, struggling to hold the weapon steady. If the war was so bad, why not just get rid of it? He'd been quiet for a long moment, looking out the workshop window at the mountains beyond. "Because, little one, some things we carry aren't meant to be forgotten. This rifle saved my life 32 times I can count, probably more I can't. Took lives too, enemy soldiers who'd have killed me or my brothers if I hadn't fired first. It's a heavy thing to carry, but forgetting would be heavier." She'd learned to shoot that summer. Cans first, then paper targets, then longer distances across the valley. Thomas had taught her windage and elevation, breathing and trigger control, patience and respect for the weapon. By 14, she could hit targets at ranges that made her grandfather shake his head in wonder. "You've got the gift, Ellie," he'd said one afternoon, after she'd grouped 5 shots into a space smaller than her palm at 400 yards. "Better than I ever was. But you listen to me, this isn't a game. This is about life and death, and the weight of choosing between them." She'd promised him then that she'd never use these skills for violence, that the rifle would stay in the family as a relic, nothing more. She'd kept that promise through high school, through college, through her decision to become a humanitarian worker overseas rather than following her father into military intelligence. Her father, Major David Reeves, USMC Intelligence. The man who'd inherited his father's sense of duty, and none of his caution about the cost of war. The man who died 3 months ago in the same region, killed not by the enemy but by someone within his own unit, a traitor who'd sold information for money and covered his tracks with a bullet. Elena had buried her father with full military honors. She'd listened to the speeches about sacrifice and service, and she'd gone back to her grandfather's workshop, where Thomas, now 93 and fading fast, had placed the rifle in her hands one final time. "Your daddy's killer is still out there," he'd said, his voice weak but clear. "I know you, Ellie. You're going back. I promised you I'd never use it for revenge, you said. But that's not why you're going back. His grip on her hand had been surprisingly strong. You're going because there are Marines dying right now because of that traitor, and you're the only one who can stop it. Your father died trying to expose whoever's feeding information to the enemy. You finish his work, not for revenge for the men still in the fight. The old man had died 2 weeks later. The rifle passed down one final time, carrying with it the weight of 2 wars and the ghosts of 3 generations. The Marines were arguing. Ryan could hear it even over the sporadic gunfire, raised voices behind the eastern bunker. Accusations and counter-accusations flying faster than bullets. She's a spook, has to be. Nobody civilian just walks into a firefight. Did you see that shot? 600 meters in this light? Could be insurgent, leading us into a trap. Ryan found Elena where he'd left her, methodically cleaning the old rifle with a cloth that looked as ancient as the weapon itself. She worked with the mechanical precision of ritual, ignoring the chaos around her. You need to tell me why you're really here, Ryan said, crouching beside her. My men think you're either CIA or enemy. I need to know which before someone makes a bad decision. Elena didn't look up from her work. 3 months ago, someone in a forward operating base like this one sent encrypted coordinates to hostile forces, resulting in an ambush that killed 17 Marines and 1 intelligence officer, my father. Now she did meet his eyes. The investigation went nowhere. The traitor is still operating, still feeding information, and based on the tactical precision of this attack, they're likely stationed here, in this compound. Ryan felt ice water run through his veins. That's impossible. Every man here has been vetted, cleared. So was my father, until someone put a bullet in his head and made it look like enemy action. She finished with the rifle, worked the bolt to check the mechanism. I've spent 3 months tracking communication patterns, supply routes, intelligence leaks. They all lead here, to FOB Sentinel, to your unit. And you decided to just show up in the middle of a siege? I decided to follow the pattern. These attacks aren't random, Lieutenant. They're coordinated using real-time intelligence from inside your perimeter. Someone here is telling them exactly when you're weakest, exactly where to hit. She gestured toward the compound. This attack should have started an hour ago, during the sandstorm, when your visibility was 0. Instead, it started precisely when your rotating guards would be at their most fatigued, right after shift change. Someone told them the optimal timing. Ryan wanted to argue, to defend his men, but the tactical analysis was sound. The timing had been too perfect, the enemy too well informed about their defensive layout. Hayes approached, his expression dark. Lieutenant, we've got movement in the northwest gully, exactly where she said they'd be. Elena stood, rifle in hand. They'll probe your defenses there, looking for weak points. When they find none, they'll shift to a 3-pronged assault from the south, east, and northwest simultaneously. Estimated time, 4 minutes. She looked at Ryan. I know this because that's what I'd do with the intelligence they have. And I know they have that intelligence because someone here gave it to them. Even if you're right, Ryan said slowly, even if there is a traitor, what makes you think you can find them in the middle of a firefight? Because whoever it is will make a mistake during the chaos. They'll have to communicate with their handlers, coordinate the final assault. People get sloppy when they think they're about to win. Her jaw tightened, and I'm very good at watching for mistakes. Corporal Bennett jogged over, breathless. Sir, request permission to redistribute ammunition based on Miss Reeves's tactical assessment. If she's right about the 3-pronged assault, we need to reinforce those positions immediately. Ryan looked at the young Marine, then at Elena, then at the compound full of men trusting him to keep them alive. Every instinct screamed at him not to trust a civilian who'd appeared out of nowhere with a rusty rifle and a conspiracy theory. But 37 Marines were dead or wounded, ammunition was critical, and dawn was still 3 hours away. Sometimes leadership meant trusting your gut when all the data said otherwise. Do it, Ryan ordered. Hayes, coordinate with squad leaders. Shift 2 fire teams to positions covering south, east, and northwest approaches. Bennett, you're on ammunition distribution. He turned to Elena. You're with me. If you're right, prove it. If you're wrong, you're in the brig until I can figure out what the hell is really going on. She nodded once, curt and military despite her civilian clothes. Fair enough, Lieutenant. But I need access to your communications equipment and personnel manifests. Absolutely not. Then you need to accept that good men will die because you're too stubborn to trust the one person who might be able to stop it. She held his gaze. Your call. The compound shook with another impact, this one from the east, then south, then northwest. 3 positions, just as she'd predicted, coordinated to the second. Ryan made his decision. Come with me. The command post had the organized chaos of any headquarters under siege. Radio chatter overlapped with shouted coordinates. Paper maps were spread across a plywood table, marked with positions and casualty counts. Corporal Matthews, the radio operator, looked up in surprise when Ryan entered with Elena. Sir, we've got confirmation on those 3 assault positions. They're bringing up heavy weapons. Looks like they're preparing for a major push. Acknowledged. Get me Captain Miller on the northern position. Ryan turned to Elena. You've got 2 minutes. What do you need? She'd already moved to the communications log, her eyes scanning entries with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Everyone who transmitted outgoing messages in the last 24 hours. Any encrypted communications that didn't go through official channels. Personnel who've been off compound in the last week. Matthews looked at Ryan, who nodded. The corporal pulled up the digital logs, reluctance written across his face. Elena's finger traced down the list, pausing occasionally to check timestamps against the compound's duty roster spread out beside her. Her expression remained neutral, but Ryan saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her other hand never strayed far from the rifle propped against the table. There, she said suddenly, pointing to an entry. Encrypted transmission, 1700 hours yesterday. Sent during the sandstorm, when atmospheric conditions would make interception difficult. Sent from Console 3, but the authentication code belongs to someone who wasn't scheduled to be in communications at that time. Could be a clerical error, Matthews protested. People swap shifts, use available terminals, check who was signed in to Console 3 at that timestamp. Matthews typed rapidly, then frowned. Staff Sergeant Warren. But his code shows he logged in from Console 1, not 3, meaning someone used his authentication without authorization. Elena turned to Ryan. Where is Warren now? Before Ryan could answer, the building shook violently. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging them into darkness illuminated only by emergency lighting and the glow of computer screens. Direct hit on the generator, someone shouted from outside. In the chaos that followed, Marines scrambling for flashlights, emergency protocols being shouted across the compound, Elena moved to the window and scanned the perimeter. Her grandfather's rifle came up smoothly, and she worked the bolt with practiced ease. What are you doing? Ryan demanded, making sure the traitor doesn't take advantage of this. If they're going to send a signal or attempt to sabotage from within, now's the perfect time. Her eye found the sight picture, tracking slowly across the compound. There, southwest corner, near the fuel depot, someone's moving against traffic, away from their defensive position. Ryan grabbed his binoculars and followed her line of sight. In the emergency lighting and muzzle flash, he could barely make out a figure in Marine combat uniform, moving with purpose toward the perimeter fence. That's Staff Sergeant Warren, Matthews said from behind them, his voice uncertain. But why would he be heading toward the fence during an attack? Elena's answer was cold and certain. Because he's going to signal the final assault coordinates. Probably using a laser designator or IR strobe that we can't see, but the enemy has equipment to detect. You don't know that, Ryan said, but his hand was already on his radio. All positions. This is actual. I need eyes on Staff Sergeant Warren. Current position southwest perimeter. Do not engage, but do not let him leave the compound. The response came back, crackling with confusion and overlapping questions, but the net result was clear. Warren was too far away, too close to the fence, and in the darkness and chaos, no one could intercept him in time. I can take the shot, Elena said quietly. Non-lethal. Wound him enough to stop him, keep him alive for questioning. Ryan's mind raced through the implications. She was a civilian. Warren was a Marine with 12 years of service. If she was wrong, if this was all some terrible mistake or misunderstanding, he'd have authorized shooting one of his own men based on the word of a stranger with a rusty rifle. Through his binoculars, he saw Warren reach the fence. Saw him pull something from his vest, small, handheld, with the distinctive shape of a laser designator. Take the shot, Ryan said. Elena adjusted her position, bracing the rifle against the window frame. Her breathing slowed, became metronomic. Through the scope, she could see Warren raising the designator toward the enemy position on the ridge, about to paint the most vulnerable targets in the compound for what would likely be a devastating mortar or artillery strike. 640 meters, crosswind still gusting from the west. Target moving slowly, focused on his equipment rather than his surroundings. She had maybe 2 seconds before he completed the transmission. The rifle cracked once, spitting flame in the darkness. The old weapon kicked against her shoulder like a living thing, familiar and fierce. Through his binoculars, Ryan watched Warren spin and fall, the laser designator tumbling from his hands. The man clutched his shoulder, writhing on the ground, but alive. Every Marine in the compound seemed to freeze simultaneously, caught between the external attack and this impossible internal development. In the sudden quiet, the only sound was Elena working the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, keeping her rifle trained on Warren's position until 2 Marines rushed forward to secure him. Hayes's voice came over the radio, shaken but professional. Target secured. He's wounded but stable. Sir, he was definitely trying to signal the enemy. We recovered the designator. Ryan slowly lowered his binoculars and turned to Elena. She was already clearing the rifle, her movements automatic, her face illuminated by emergency lighting, and something that might have been grief or might have been grim satisfaction. My grandfather always said the hardest shots weren't the longest ones, she said quietly. They were the ones where you had to shoot someone who should have been on your side. Outside, the enemy assault faltered, confused by the lack of the signal they'd been expecting. In the space of 1 bullet from a 70-year-old rifle, the entire tactical situation had shifted, but Ryan knew the fight was far from over. With Warren secured and being treated by a corpsman under armed guard, Ryan called an emergency meeting of his squad leaders. Elena stood off to the side, reloading the rifle with ammunition that looked as old as the weapon itself. The brass cartridges she pulled from her jacket pocket were tarnished but well maintained, each one representing a piece of history about to be relaunched into the present. Here's what we know, Ryan addressed the 5 Marines gathered in the command post. Staff Sergeant Warren was attempting to provide targeting data to hostile forces. Without that data, their coordinated assault loses its precision. They're going to be confused, angry, and likely to make mistakes. We need to capitalize on that. Sergeant Hayes, his head wound now bandaged, shook his head in disbelief. Warren was in my training class. We deployed together twice. I don't understand how. We'll figure out the how and why later, Ryan interrupted. Right now, we need to shift from pure defense to making them pay for every meter they try to take. He looked at Elena. You said you studied your grandfather's tactics. What would he do? She moved to the map spread across the table, her finger tracing the terrain features around the compound. Okinawa was about understanding that numerical superiority doesn't matter if you control the choke points and force the enemy to fight on your terms. You've got high ground here, here, and here. She marked 3 positions. The enemy has been attacking from the valleys because Warren told them your weakest positions, but he also had to tell them to avoid certain areas, which means those areas are your strongest defensive terrain. The northern ridge, Bennett said suddenly, understanding dawning. We abandoned that observation post 2 days ago because Warren said it was too exposed, but if they've been avoiding it, then it's actually the best position for an ambush, Elena finished. Get a fire team up there with your remaining heavy weapons. When they try to regroup after their assault fails, catch them in the open. Ryan studied the map, then studied her. She read terrain like a Marine officer, not a civilian humanitarian worker. Where did you really learn this? My father spent 15 years in intelligence. He'd come home from deployments and drill me on tactical scenarios like some fathers play catch. Said it was important I understood the world he lived in. Her voice carried a weight that spoke of old arguments and older regrets. I thought it was excessive. Turns out he was preparing me for this. Hayes grunted. All due respect, ma'am, but knowing theory is different from executing under fire. Then test me, Elena said simply. Give me a position and I'll prove I can do more than shoot. Ryan made a decision that he knew would either save them or court-martial him. Hayes, take Miss Reeves and Corporal Bennett to the northern ridge. Set up overlapping fields of fire. When the enemy realizes Warren hasn't checked in and tries to adjust their assault, I want you in position to shred their formations. Sir, Hayes protested. Taking orders from a civilian? You're not taking orders from her. You're accepting tactical advice from someone who's proven herself more reliable than one of our own. Ryan's voice hardened. Warren almost killed us all. She stopped him. I'm willing to trust her until she gives me reason not to. Are we clear, Sergeant? Hayes's jaw worked, but he nodded. Yes, sir. Clear. The team moved out into the darkness. Elena following Hayes with the old rifle slung across her back. The enemy fire had slackened, confused by the lack of the signal they'd been promised. It was a temporary respite, and everyone knew it. The northern ridge was a brutal climb in full combat gear. Elena, carrying only the rifle, a bandolier of ancient ammunition, and a canteen, still felt her lungs burning by the time they reached the abandoned observation post. The position overlooked a narrow valley that funneled toward the compound's northern gate, perfect for defense, which is exactly why Warren would have marked it as too dangerous to use. Bennett set up the M240 machine gun on its tripod while Hayes scanned the approaches with night vision equipment. Elena checked her rifle, counting her remaining ammunition. 37 rounds. Her grandfather had gone through entire battles with less. Movement, Hayes whispered. Valley floor. Approximately 40 hostiles regrouping. They looked confused. Through the rifle's sight, Elena could see them, figures in mixed military and civilian gear, clustering around what looked like a commander trying to reorganize his forces after the failed assault. They thought they were safely out of range, far enough from the compound's main defensive positions. Range? She asked quietly. 720 meters, Bennett replied, checking his equipment. Winds picking up from the west, gusting to 12 knots. Elena did the calculations in her head, adjusting for the unfamiliar wind patterns of this desert compared to the Montana valleys where she'd learned to shoot. The rifle in her hands had been designed for these distances, crafted in an era when skilled marksmen regularly engaged targets at ranges that would make modern infantrymen shake their heads. When I fire, they're going to scatter, she said to Hayes. Give them 3 seconds, then light them up with the machine gun. They'll run for cover in the rocks on the eastern side of the valley. That's where you'll do the most damage. How do you know they'll run east? Bennett asked. Because west has steeper terrain, south puts them closer to the compound's guns, and north takes them away from their support positions. East is the only logical choice. She settled into position, the old rifle stock finding her shoulder like it had been carved for her. Psychology of retreat is predictable once you understand fear. She breathed out slowly, found her natural pause, and pressed the trigger. The rifle boomed in the darkness. 700 meters away, the enemy commander dropped, and chaos erupted. The hostile forces scattered exactly as predicted, streaming toward the eastern rocks. Now, Elena said. Hayes didn't hesitate. The M240 opened up, its distinctive sound echoing across the valley. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness like angry fireflies, finding targets caught in the open. The ambush was devastating, precise, and exactly what the Marines needed to shift momentum. Elena worked the bolt, found another target, a machine gunner, trying to set up a supporting position. Another shot, another enemy combatant removed from the fight. She'd promised her grandfather she'd never use these skills for revenge. This wasn't revenge. This was survival, protection, the original purpose for which the rifle had been crafted. By the time the enemy withdrew, dragging their wounded with them, the northern valley was littered with abandoned equipment and empty shell casings. The Marines on the ridge were silent, staring at Elena with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Ma'am, Bennett finally said, what exactly did you do before you came here? Elena safed the rifle and stood, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. I built schools in refugee camps, vaccinated children, delivered food to people who'd lost everything to wars they didn't start. She met his eyes. My father died trying to stop people like Warren from prolonging those wars. This rifle is just a tool. I'd rather never touch it again. But if using it means other fathers get to go home to their children, then I'll carry it as long as necessary. Hayes's radio crackled. Ryan's voice came through, strained but alive. Northern position, be advised. Enemy forces are retreating across all fronts. Whatever you did up there, it broke their assault. Get back to compound as soon as possible. We need to deal with our internal situation before they regroup. As they climbed down from the ridge, Elena thought about her grandfather, about the weight of a rifle carried across decades, about her father, who died trying to expose the rot in his own ranks, about the strange inheritance of violence, passed down like a family heirloom, and the terrible necessity of knowing when to unpack it. The sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. They'd survived the night. But the hardest fighting, Elena knew, was still to come. Dawn broke over FOB Sentinel like an accusation, harsh light revealing the damage of the night's battle. 14 Marines wounded, 3 critical, ammunition nearly depleted, infrastructure damaged, but alive. Against all odds, they were alive. In the makeshift detention area, actually a supply room with armed guards posted outside, Staff Sergeant Thomas Warren sat handcuffed to a chair, the gunshot wound to his shoulder treated and bandaged. His face was pale but defiant when Ryan entered with Elena behind him. "You don't understand," Warren said immediately. "This isn't what it looks like." Ryan pulled up a chair, his exhaustion written in the deep lines around his eyes. "Then explain it to me, Tom. Explain why one of my most experienced NCOs was about to laser designate targets for the people trying to kill us." Warren's gaze flicked to Elena, and something like recognition crossed his face. "You're Reeves's daughter." "David Reeves." "I am," Elena said quietly, moving into his line of sight. "And you're the man who killed him." "No." Warren shook his head violently. "I didn't pull that trigger. That was..." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Ryan leaned forward. "Was who, Tom? Who pulled the trigger, if not you?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by distant shouts of Marines reinforcing positions and treating wounded. Finally, Warren spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Captain Miller." The name hit Ryan like a physical blow. Captain James Miller, the compound's executive officer, second in command, a Marine with 18 years of service and 2 Bronze Stars. The man Ryan had trusted with his life a dozen times over the past 6 months. "That's impossible," Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Elena asked, her tone cold. "Where is Captain Miller right now?" Ryan keyed his radio. "All positions. I need location confirmation on Captain Miller." The responses came back confused, overlapping. No one had seen the captain since the generator was hit. His last known position was the eastern bunker, but that was over an hour ago. "He left," Warren said, "during the chaos, during the attack. He had an extraction plan with the enemy forces. That's why the assault was so precise. He was coordinating everything from inside, feeding them real-time updates. I was just his communications relay." "Why?" Elena asked, though she already knew. It was always the same answer. "Money? Ideology? Both. Neither. Does it matter?" Warren's defiance crumbled. "They have my daughter. My ex-wife took her to Europe 2 years ago, got mixed up with the wrong people. Miller said he could get her out, get her safe, if I helped him. Just some intelligence reports," he said. "Nothing critical." Then it escalated, and by the time I realized what I was part of, they had enough evidence to bury me. And they still had my daughter. Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against concrete. How long have you been compromising this unit?" 8 months. Since before you even took command." Warren looked up at Ryan with red-rimmed eyes. "I tried to stop, God help me, I tried. But Miller, he's smart, careful, always had leverage. Your father," he said to Elena, "he figured it out. Found the pattern in the intelligence reports, traced it back to this compound. Miller found out he was investigating and arranged the ambush. Made it look like enemy action, but it was Miller who gave the order." Elena's hand tightened on her rifle. Ryan saw the muscles in her jaw clench, saw the war between revenge and justice playing out behind her eyes. "Where did Miller go?" Ryan demanded. "What's his extraction plan?" "Abandoned village, 3 clicks northwest. There's a tunnel system the locals used during the previous war. The enemy forces were supposed to control the compound by now, execute everyone as hostile combatants during the siege. No witnesses, no investigation. Miller would slip away in the chaos, already reported as Kia." Warren coughed, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "That's why I had to transmit coordinates for their final assault. If they'd failed, if people survived to investigate, Miller would have killed my daughter and framed me for everything." Ryan turned to Hayes, who'd been standing guard at the door. "Get me Lieutenant Castellano and Corporal Bennett. Full combat load. We're going after Miller." "Sir," Hayes said carefully, "we're barely holding the compound. If you take men for a pursuit, if Miller escapes, every Marine who dies in future attacks because of his intelligence is on us." Ryan's voice was steel. "We end this now." Elena checked her rifle, counted her remaining ammunition. 23 rounds. "I'm coming with you." "Negative. You've done enough. This is a Marine Corps matter now. It stopped being just a Marine Corps matter when my father died investigating this." She met his stare without flinching. "Miller killed him. I'm going to make sure he faces justice. This isn't about revenge." "I know," she interrupted. "If it was about revenge, I'd have shot Warren in the head instead of the shoulder. I know the difference between justice and vengeance. Lieutenant, my grandfather spent 40 years teaching me. Ryan studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. You follow orders. You stay behind the Marines. And if I tell you to break off, you break off. Clear? Clear. 20 minutes later, a 5-person team moved out of the northern gate. Ryan, Hayes, Castellano, Bennett, and Elena. They traveled fast and low, using the terrain for cover, knowing that enemy forces might still be in the area. The abandoned village appeared through the morning haze like a ghost of better times. Mud brick buildings collapsed or pockmarked with bullet holes. Rusted vehicles half buried in drifting sand. And somewhere in this maze of decay, a traitor trying to disappear. Ryan deployed his team in a standard sweep pattern, clearing buildings one by one. Elena moved with them, her old rifle at the ready, eyes constantly scanning for threats. She'd trained for humanitarian work, not urban combat, but the fundamentals her grandfather had taught her applied: awareness, breath control, decisive action when needed. They found Miller in the 3rd building they cleared, crouched in what had once been someone's kitchen, packing documents into a waterproof bag. His sidearm was on the floor beside him, too far to reach before Ryan's team had him surrounded. "Don't," Ryan said simply, his M4 trained on the captain's center mass. Miller slowly raised his hands, turning to face them. He looked remarkably calm for a man caught red-handed in treason. "Lieutenant Garrett, I was wondering if you'd figure it out in time." "Why, sir?" The honorific felt like acid on Ryan's tongue. "You're decorated, respected, you had a career, a future. Why throw it all away?" Miller's laugh was bitter. "Career? Future? You think the Marine Corps takes care of its own? I've got 32 confirmed kills, 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, and you know what I have to show for it: a pending divorce, PTSD that the VA refuses to treat, and a pension that won't cover my daughter's college. The people I was fighting were offering 10 times my annual salary for information that headquarters doesn't even classify as critical." "So you got Marines killed for money," Elena said, stepping forward. Her rifle wasn't pointed at him, but it wouldn't take much to change that. "Including my father." Miller's eyes found hers. "Your father was a problem. Too smart, too persistent. If he just filed his report through proper channels, it would have been buried in bureaucracy. But he kept digging, kept making noise. He was going to expose not just me, but an entire network of officers supplementing their income with intelligence sales. Billions of dollars flowing to people who understand that patriotism doesn't pay the bills." He shook his head. "I'm sorry about your father, truly. But he was collateral damage in a war that's bigger than one man's life." Elena's finger moved to the rifle's trigger. Ryan saw it and spoke quickly. "Don't. He's not worth it. He killed my father," she said, her voice steady despite the rage Ryan could see building behind her control. "I know. And he'll face justice for it. But if you shoot him now, you become exactly what he is: someone who puts personal vengeance above the law." Ryan stepped between Elena and Miller. "Your grandfather carried that rifle through a war and never once fired it in anger outside of legitimate combat. Honor that. Honor him." For a long moment, Elena didn't move. The rifle remained steady, trained past Ryan toward Miller. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lowered the weapon. "You're right," she said quietly. "He's not worth my grandfather's legacy." They zip-tied Miller's hands and began the march back to the compound. The man who'd betrayed every principle he'd sworn to uphold walked in silence, surrounded by Marines who'd once called him sir, now looking at him like the traitor he was. Elena walked at the rear of the formation, the old rifle slung across her back, and thought about justice, about revenge, about the difference between the two and how thin that line could be. They were 100 meters from FOB Sentinel when the enemy attacked again. The first RPG streaked past Hayes' head close enough that the heat wash singed his uniform. It detonated against the rocks behind them, showering the team with stone fragments. Then the hillside erupted with muzzle flashes. "Contact right," Ryan shouted, dragging Miller down behind a low wall. "Ambush! Return fire!" Bennett and Castellano immediately opened up, their rifles barking in controlled bursts toward the enemy positions. But the math was terrible: 5 Marines and a civilian against what looked like at least 30 hostiles in prepared positions. "They were waiting for us," Miller said with bitter satisfaction. "My backup plan. If I didn't make the extraction window, they were supposed to hit anyone coming out of that village." "How thoughtful," Ryan snarled. He keyed his radio. "FOB Sentinel, this is actual. We are under effective fire, 100 meters northwest of the compound. Request immediate support. Be advised, we have the traitor in custody." The response crackled back. "Actual, be advised, compound is also under attack. Enemy forces renewed assault when they saw you exit the wire. We cannot spare personnel for extraction." Ryan's blood ran cold. Miller had planned this perfectly: draw out the leadership, launch a simultaneous attack on the weakened compound. Whether the ambush team captured him or not was irrelevant. Either way, the compound would fall. "We need to break through," Hayes said, firing short bursts toward the enemy. "Get back to the compound before they overrun it. We'll be cut down in the open," Castellano countered. "We need cover." Supporting fire. Elena was already moving. She scrambled up onto the broken wall, the old rifle coming to her shoulder with practiced smoothness. "I'll suppress. You move on my signal." "That's suicide," Ryan said. "You can't hold them alone." "I won't be holding them. I'll be hurting them enough that they keep their heads down." She worked the bolt, chambering around. "My grandfather held a ridgeline against a Japanese platoon for 40 minutes with this exact rifle. I figure I can buy you 5. Before Ryan could argue, Elena fired. The shot cracked across the desert, and through his optic, Ryan saw an enemy fighter fall from a position on the hillside. She worked the bolt smoothly, acquired another target, fired again. Another hostile down. The enemy fire shifted toward her position, rounds cracking and whining off the rocks around her. She didn't flinch, didn't rush. Each shot was deliberate, economical. She was burning through her remaining ammunition, but every bullet found a target. "Move," she shouted. Now, Ryan grabbed Miller and ran, Hayes and the others laying down covering fire. They made it 20 meters before enemy fire forced them down again. But now they had better cover, closer to the compound. Behind them, Elena continued her deadly work. 16 rounds left. 15. 14. Each shot bought seconds, bought meters, bought survival for the Marines trying to reach safety. The rifle clicked empty. She'd known it was coming, had counted every round, but the finality of it still hit hard. No more ammunition, no more suppressive fire, just her and a 70-year-old rifle against an enemy that now realized she was no longer a threat. Hostile fighters began advancing, emboldened by the silence from her position. Elena looked at the rifle in her hands, then at the compound in the distance where Marines were fighting and dying. She thought about her grandfather, about honor and sacrifice and the weight of carrying weapons meant to protect. Then she fixed the bayonet, an ancient blade her grandfather had kept with the rifle, and prepared to make her last stand count. The first hostile to reach her position died with the bayonet through his chest, Elena using the rifle like a spear. The second caught the stock across his jaw, shattering bone. She moved like her grandfather must have moved in the Pacific, efficiently, desperately, knowing that survival meant being faster and more vicious than men who outnumbered her. But there were too many. A rifle butt caught her in the ribs, driving the air from her lungs. Hands grabbed her arms, yanking her down from the wall. She fought, using every dirty trick she'd learned in self-defense courses, but physics and numbers overwhelmed skill. Then the compound's 50 caliber machine gun opened up, its heavy rounds chewing through the enemy position with devastating effect. Ryan had made it back, had turned the compound's weapons on her attackers. The hostiles trying to secure Elena scattered, and in that moment of chaos, she broke free, grabbed the old rifle, and ran. She made it to the compound's gate with bullets kicking up dust around her heels. Hayes yanked her inside, and the gate slammed shut behind her. She collapsed against the sandbags, lungs burning, ribs screaming, but alive. Ryan was there, helping her up. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. Learned it from my grandfather," she managed between gasps. "Never leave your weapon behind. Never abandon your position until the mission's complete. Your mission was to survive. You did that." She looked down at the rifle in her hands, the stock cracked from being used as a club, the bayonet still wet with blood, but fundamentally intact, still capable, still carrying the weight of 2 wars. "No," she said quietly. "My mission was to stop Miller and protect the Marines still fighting. That's not complete until everyone gets home." The battle for FOB Sentinel raged for another 3 hours. With Miller secured and his intelligence no longer feeding the enemy, the attack lost its coordination. The hostile forces, realizing they weren't going to achieve the quick victory they'd been promised, withdrew in stages, dragging their wounded with them. By noon, The valley was quiet, except for the sound of helicopters in the distance, medevac birds finally able to land now that the siege had broken. Elena sat in the shadow of the command post, cleaning the rifle one more time. Her grandfather's rifle, her father's legacy, her own burden now, carried into a new war and somehow, miraculously, brought back out. The blade of the bayonet had a small nick in it that would need filing. The stock would need repair, but it was fundamentally sound. And the barrel, despite 70 years and 2 wars, was still true. Some things, she thought, were built to last, built to be passed down, built to carry the weight of protecting what mattered, generation after generation. She just wished it didn't have to be this particular inheritance. The morning after the siege broke, FOB Sentinel looked like it had been hit by a natural disaster. Sandbags torn open and scattered, buildings pockmarked with bullet impacts, the motor pool littered with shrapnel-damaged vehicles. But the flag still flew over the command post, tattered and scorched, but defiant. Elena found Lieutenant Ryan Garrett on the northern ridge, where she'd set up the ambush with Hayes and Bennett. He was alone, staring out at the valley where so much violence had occurred, where so many Marines had bled to hold ground that would be abandoned within the year. "They're flying out the wounded in an hour," Ryan said without turning. "Captain Miller and Staff Sergeant Warren are going in restraints, military police escort. There'll be an investigation, courts-martial." The whole system grinding through its process. "Good," Elena said, though the word felt hollow. Justice was important, necessary, but it wouldn't bring her father back, wouldn't erase the nightmares she knew were coming, the faces of the men she'd killed in that desperate last stand at the wall. "You could go with them," Ryan continued. "Get back to civilization, hot showers, food that doesn't come in MRE pouches. You've earned it. What about you? What happens to the Marines still here?" "We hold until our relief arrives. Another 3 weeks if logistics works out, another month if it doesn't." He finally turned to look at her, and she saw the exhaustion written deep in his features. "We'll be fine. You don't need to stay." But she heard the question underneath. "Will you stay?" Elena looked down at the rifle in her hands. She'd cleaned it thoroughly, repaired what could be repaired, but it would never be the same. Combat aged weapons, the same way it aged people. You could maintain them, care for them, but the scars remained. "My grandfather never talked much about the war," she said. "When I was young, I thought it was because the memories were too painful. Later, I realized it wasn't about pain, it was about weight. The weight of carrying experiences that civilians couldn't understand, shouldn't have to understand. You understand now, I do." She traced a finger along the rifle's stock, feeling the grain of wood that had absorbed 70 years of stories. "He also told me that the hardest part of combat wasn't the fighting, it was coming home afterward, knowing that you'd seen and done things that changed you fundamentally, and trying to find a place in a world that wanted you unchanged." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "You planning on staying, then? Processing it with people who understand?" "I'm staying because there's more work to do." Warren gave up information, but he wasn't the only leak. Miller was part of a network, remember? Other officers in other compounds selling intelligence. My father's investigation documented at least 6 other suspects. She met Ryan's eyes. "Someone needs to finish what he started. That's not your job. Let the investigation will take years, bogged down in military bureaucracy and politics. People will close ranks, destroy evidence. You know it, I know it." Her voice hardened. "My father died because he got close to the truth. I'm not going to let that be for nothing." "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that I stay embedded with units like this one. Ostensibly as a civilian liaison or humanitarian coordinator, I have the credentials. But really, I'll be watching, looking for the patterns my father identified, finding the leaks before they can do more damage. That's dangerous. If Miller's network realizes what you're doing, they already know who I am." Warren recognized me, which means Miller knew I was David Reeves's daughter. Coming here, stopping their operation, that puts a target on my back whether I pursue this or not. She allowed herself a small, grim smile. "At least this way, I'm hunting them instead of waiting for them to come for me." Ryan studied her for a long moment. "You're not talking about justice anymore. This is starting to sound like revenge." "Maybe," she admitted. "There's a fine line, isn't there? Between stopping bad people and punishing them, between protecting others and avenging wrongs. My grandfather walked that line his whole life, never quite sure which side he was on, but always trying to stay on the right side of it. And you think you can do the same?" Elena looked down at the valley. at the places where men had died on both sides. I think I have to try, because if I don't, if I just go home and try to forget, then every Marine who dies because of intelligence leaks, every family that loses someone because corruption persists, that becomes my responsibility. I couldn't stop my father's death, but maybe I can prevent others. They stood in silence, watching the helicopters approach in the distance. The sound of rotors grew louder, bringing supplies, reinforcements, and the apparatus of investigation and accountability. Your grandfather's rifle, Ryan said. You're going to keep carrying it? I don't know. She hefted the weapon, feeling its weight. Part of me wants to lock it away, let it finally rest after all these years. Another part knows that tools don't retire until the work is done. What work is that? Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Exposing corruption before it kills. Being the person my father tried to be. The person my grandfather was. She paused. The person I hope I can become. Ryan pulled a small notebook from his pocket and scribbled something. This is my personal contact information, not military channels, just. If you need someone who understands what you're doing, someone who won't ask questions when you need to move fast or get information. He handed her the paper. Your father wasn't wrong to keep digging, neither are you. Elena took the paper, tucked it carefully into her jacket pocket next to her last few rounds of ammunition. Thank you, Lieutenant Ryan. If we're going to be working in the shadows of military bureaucracy, might as well be on first-name basis. Elena. She held out her hand, and they shook, not a civilian and a soldier, but two people bound by common purpose and shared trauma. The helicopters were landing now, kicking up dust that turned the morning golden. Marines rushed to assist with unloading, to load wounded, to brief the arriving investigation team. The machinery of military justice beginning its slow, grinding work. Elena walked back toward the compound, the rifle slung across her shoulders. She'd come here for answers and found them. She'd come for revenge and chosen justice instead. But she'd also found something unexpected. Purpose. The same sense of mission that must have driven her grandfather through the Pacific, driven her father through years of intelligence work. Some weights were meant to be carried, passed down through generations. Some fights were worth continuing even when you weren't sure you could win. She just hoped she had the strength to carry this particular burden as far as it needed to go. 6 months later, at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, a memorial ceremony was held for Major David Reeves and the 17 Marines who died in the ambush that took his life. The investigation had finally concluded, confirming what Elena had discovered: a network of corrupt officers selling intelligence, trading American lives for money. Captain James Miller was facing court-martial and life imprisonment. Staff Sergeant Warren had pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testifying against the larger network. 8 other officers were under investigation. The rot was being cut out, slowly and painfully, but finally exposed to the light. Elena stood at the back of the ceremony, wearing a simple black dress that felt foreign after 6 months of tactical clothing and desert dust. She'd spent that time embedded with 3 different forward operating bases, quietly watching, gathering evidence, passing information to investigators through secure channels. The rifle was back home now, locked in her grandfather's old workshop. She'd decided it had earned its rest. There were other tools for the work she was doing now: cameras, encrypted communications, the ability to move through military spaces as a trusted civilian. The old weapon had served its purpose, bridged the gap between generations, proven that sometimes history could reach forward and change the present. Lieutenant, now Captain Ryan Garrett, approached her after the ceremony. You didn't have to stay back there. You're part of this story. I'm not looking for recognition. This memorial is for the people who died, not for the people who survived. She watched the family members receiving folded flags, saw the tears and the rigid military bearing barely containing grief. Did they mention my father's investigation in the official record? They did. He's being posthumously awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal for his work exposing the corruption. Ryan paused. They want to give you a civilian medal too, for your actions at FOB Sentinel. I'll decline. Medals draw attention, and attention makes the work harder. She turned to face him. How are your Marines? The ones who were at Sentinel, scattered to new assignments. Hayes made Staff Sergeant. Bennett is at embassy duty in Europe. Most are doing okay, considering. His expression darkened slightly. A few are struggling with what Warren's betrayal means. Hard to trust your brothers when one of them was selling you out. That's why this matters, Elena said quietly. Finding the others in the network, making sure it doesn't happen again. Trust is the foundation of military units, These people poisoned that foundation. Speaking of which, Ryan lowered his voice. There's a situation developing at Camp Leatherneck, Afghanistan. Intelligence patterns similar to what your father documented, but the unit there is getting ready to deploy to an isolated valley. Could be another Sentinel situation. Elena's jaw tightened. You have details? He handed her a folder. Unofficial. Technically, I could be court-martialed for sharing this with a civilian. Then why are you? Because official channels take too long, and Marines are going to die if we wait for proper authorization. He met her eyes. Your father understood that sometimes you have to break rules to save lives. I think you understand it too. She took the folder, already scanning the contents. Deployment schedules, personnel files, intelligence summaries. The pattern was there if you knew how to look. Information leaking at precise intervals, attacks timed with suspicious accuracy, an officer with unexplained wealth. I'll need to get embedded with this unit before they deploy, she said, mind already working through logistics, already arranged. You're going in as a State Department liaison attached to their humanitarian assistance program. Ryan allowed himself a small smile. Turns out the military likes having civilians around when they want plausible deniability. Thank you, Ryan. Don't thank me. Just find the leak before more Marines end up on memorial walls. He glanced back at the ceremony, where a chaplain was offering closing prayers. Your father would be proud of what you're doing. Your grandfather too. Elena thought about that workshop in Montana, about the rifle hanging on the wall, about the weight of inheritance, and the choice to carry forward something difficult because it was necessary. I hope so, she said. I really hope so. 3 weeks later, Elena was in Afghanistan, watching a new compound, meeting new Marines, looking for signs of new betrayals. The rifle stayed home, but its lessons traveled with her. Patience, precision, the understanding that sometimes one well-placed action could change everything. In the command post at FOB Sentinel, a photograph hung on the wall. It showed Lieutenant Garrett and his Marines, battered and exhausted but alive, standing with a woman holding an old rifle. No names were attached to the photo, no official caption. Just a moment captured, a story that would be told in whispers among Marines who served there. That's the woman who walked in during the siege, new arrivals would be told. She had a rifle from World War II and took shots that shouldn't have been possible. Saved the whole compound, they say, exposed a traitor in the ranks. Is the story true? The new Marines would ask, and the veterans would look at the photo, remembering the sound of that old rifle cracking in the darkness, and say, every word. And if you're ever in a situation where a civilian walks in with an impossible weapon during an impossible fight, you might want to listen to what they have to say. The legend of the ghost sniper had lived on through Thomas Reeves, passing into Marine Corps folklore. Now that legend had a new chapter, a new carrier, a granddaughter who'd taken up the burden not out of desire for glory but out of necessity. Some stories don't end. They just find new people to tell them, new battles to fight, new reasons to remember that courage and sacrifice aren't bound by time or generation. They're choices, made again and again, by people who understand that the hardest battles aren't always the ones fought with bullets. Sometimes, they're the battles fought with truth, with persistence, with the refusal to let corruption and betrayal go unchallenged. Elena's work was far from over. There were more leaks to find, more units to protect, more families who deserve to see their Marines come home. The rifle might be retired, but the mission continued. In Montana, in a quiet workshop, an old rifle rested on its rack, cleaned, maintained, ready if ever needed again. A tool that had served 3 generations, spanning 8 decades, crossing from the beaches of Okinawa to the deserts of the Middle East. And in Afghanistan, a woman with her grandfather's eyes scanned a compound for signs of betrayal, carrying forward a legacy that refused to quit, refused to compromise, refused to let the bad people win. The legend lived on, not in the rifle, but in the people willing to carry what needed carrying, willing to fight what needed fighting, willing to be what others needed them to be. That was the true inheritance. Not a weapon, but a choice. And Elena had made hers.